Horticulture and wine industries are relieved more seasonal workers are on the way to ease critical labour shortages. The government is allowing workers from Samoa, Tonga and Vanuatu to come here without having to go into managed isolation. The industry association representing apple, pear and nashi growers is taking some of the credit, saying the decision is the result of many months of negotiations between the industries and the government. Alan Pollard from New Zealand Apples and Pears says it's too early to say how many workers could be brought in because of the move.
We would normally have at a maximum up to 12,500 in the country. We expected about 7,000 in the country now, a number of which want to go home. So we would expect a shortfall in the region of sort of 7,000 or 8,000, and we would want to bring in as close as possible to those by the time we hit the major peaks in harvest next year.
Yes, and is there enough time to get them all in so that you can ensure there isn't a repeat of the situation where sort of fruit is left on the ground to rot?
We're confident that we can. Obviously, we have to have a plan in place with the agencies to make sure logistically we can do that, but the industries are very confident that we can do that.
There will be restrictions, presumably, on the people coming in. They would be required to have tests prior to leaving and on arrival. Is that something the industry would pay for?
Yeah, look, the industry put a proposition to the government a little while ago, which included a testing program. So the short answer is yes. But there's also a number of other conditions that are out of our control. For example, governments of the workers wanting or willing to take their workers back at the end of their contracts. And
what about accommodation and the other support services? Presumably they are there from past years, but they will be good?
Absolutely. All the accommodations ready to go. The pastoral care, we're well organised for that. So, as I said, logistically, we're really confident that everything's in place to allow this to happen.
I guess it has sparked again the debate about pay rates, and those who argue that you wouldn't need to do this, is putting aside the fact that obviously it is something welcomed by many in the Pacific. If you were paying New Zealanders enough, there would be enough New Zealand workers to do it.
Yeah, I know that's not simply the case at all. What we've found is that a couple of things have happened this year. One is that the unemployment rate is very low, as you appreciate, and the unemployment tends to be clustered around some of the major metropolitan centres. And the reality is that they're not a mobile workforce. They're not going to leave their homes either rented or owned and their family support to move to the provinces for a few weeks' work. And we know that regardless of what we pay, that's a limiting factor. So, and the second is, of course, there's increasing competition right across the entire economy. So, there's a real shortage right across every sector. You read about it every day in the paper. That in itself actually has put pressure on wage rates in a competitive environment.
Okay, but wage rates have come up. What are you paying now on average?
Look, it does vary, and I couldn't quote an average figure. When we're talking about in the orchards, where people are paid largely on what's called a piece rate, so they're paid on what they do. The average bin rates now, so the paid per bin, has gone up significantly, particularly this year, but over the last few years. So if you look at a really high productive worker, they could probably pick a bin an hour and a half. It could be $30 to $40 an hour.
The other argument is the longer term argument here, which is that the business model, there's something wrong with it if you can only meet the picking that needs to be done by bringing in foreign workers.
Yeah, look, the industry has actually been looking at a transformation plan for many years about how do you introduce more robotics and automation. And in the pack houses, so the post-harvest technology, we're world leaders in that field, and you'll find significant amounts of automation, which has rebalanced the labour requirement there. On the orchards, it's very different. We don't strip pick our fruit. We have to make a conscious decision on every apple based on its colour before we harvest it, and that has to be done in different light and weather conditions. Our industry, the apple industry, is part of a $100 billion global industry, and no one yet has perfected the technology to allow that to happen. So our view is it's 10.
Well, I guess the counter-argument to that, though, is that because of the supply of cheap labour, there hasn't been that extra incentive to do that.
Well, it's a complete misnomer that this is cheap labour. The labour we bring in is highly skilled, highly motivated, highly productive, and they earn very, very significant rates of pay.
And on that note, this will be hugely welcomed by many in the Pacific because that is a big income earner for many of those small island nations.
Absolutely right. The Pacific nations have relied on both tourism and the work available through our industries to get them through. Tourism's decimated and our borders have been restricted. So this will be really good news for those islands.
Alan Pollard there from New Zealand Apples and Pears.